Aisha Carter, a black judge, steps into a Birmingham courtroom, her robe swirling like a storm cloud, as officers Trent Baxter and Kyle Voss halt mid-testimony, their faces paling to ash. Months ago they'd brutalized her in a park, cuffing her as a nobody. Now she grips their fate in a misconduct hearing. The air crackles with disbelief, her steady gaze piercing their panic. That arrest ignited a war she never saw coming, one poised to rage on. What happens when the hunted becomes the hunter? Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from, and if you stand for justice, hit like and subscribe, because tomorrow's episode will leave you speechless. Aisha Carter perched on a weathered wooden bench in Birmingham's Lynn Park, the late July sun pressing a sticky warmth against her skin as she scribbled notes in a leather-bound binder. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent years shaping minds and bending laws, her tailored navy blazer and crisp white blouse a stark contrast to the casual joggers and dog-walkers drifting by. Her dark curls framed a face etched with focus, her hazel eyes flicking across pages of legal precedents she'd teach next semester at Miles College. The air buzzed with the hum of cicadas, thick and syrupy, blending with the distant clatter of a street vendor's cart 2 blocks away. She barely noticed the black SUV easing into the parking lot near the fountain, its engine idling low, no lights flashing, no sirens piercing the calm. Her pen danced across the paper, underlining a passage about Fourth Amendment violations, when the crunch of gravel under heavy boots snapped her head up. 2 uniformed officers loomed into view, their shadows stretching long across the patchy grass. Trent Baxter, broad-shouldered with a buzzed scalp and a jaw like a slab of granite, led the pair, his pale blue eyes locked on her with a predator's glint. Kyle Voss trailed him, leaner, younger, his sandy hair sticking out beneath his cap, his fingers twitching near the holster strapped to his hip. Aisha's pulse quickened, but her expression stayed smooth as polished stone. She'd faced down hostile attorneys and skeptical juries. 2 cops in a park wouldn't rattle her. Yet something in their stride, purposeful and unhurried, coiled a knot in her stomach. Baxter stopped 5 feet from her bench, his boots planted wide, his voice rolling out flat and cold. "We need to see some ID, ma'am." No greeting, no explanation, just the demand slicing through the humid stillness. Aisha set her pen down slowly, her movements deliberate, and tilted her head to meet his stare. "May I ask why, officer?" Her tone was even, edged with the crispness of a woman who knew her rights cold. Voss shifted his weight, his hand brushing the grip of his pistol, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. "You're loitering suspiciously in a public space. Got a call about it. ID now." Aisha's brow creased, her mind racing through the absurdity. Loitering? In a suit with a briefcase in broad daylight? She glanced around. A white couple lounged on a blanket 50 yards away, unbothered, while a man tossed a frisbee to his kid near the gazebo, no cops in sight. The knot tightened. She reached into her blazer pocket, slow and steady, pulling out a slim wallet embossed with her initials. "I'm a professor at Miles College," she said, handing over her driver's license, "and a circuit court judge. I'm reviewing notes for a class. That's not suspicious. It's my job." Baxter snatched the card, his thick fingers smudging, the edges as he squinted at it, his lips pursing like he'd tasted something bitter. Voss stepped closer, peering over his shoulder, his smirk fading into a scowl. "Judge or not, you don't get to question us," he snapped, his voice sharp with a twang that grated against the air. "We decide what's suspicious." Aisha's breath caught, but she kept her spine straight, her hands folding neatly over her binder. "You've got my ID. Unless you've got probable cause, this is over." Baxter's eyes flicked back to her, narrowing, a flicker of something dark passing through them. He didn't hand the license back. Instead, he nodded at Voss, who lunged forward, his hand clamping around her wrist like a vice. "You're resisting," he barked, yanking her arm hard enough to make her stumble off the bench. Aisha's gasp cut through the quiet, her binder tumbling to the dirt, pages fluttering loose. "I'm not resisting," she said, her voice rising but steady. Let go of me. Baxter moved in, his bulk towering as he grabbed her other arm, twisting it behind her back. Pain shot through her shoulder, a white-hot spike, but she bit down on a cry. Suspicious behavior, non-compliance, he muttered, his breath hot against her ear as he slammed her chest first against the side of their cruiser. The metal burned through her blazer, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. A woman pushing a stroller across the park froze, her hand flying to her mouth, while a teenager on a skateboard pulled out his phone, the lens glinting in the sun. Voss snapped the cuffs on, the steel biting into her wrists. Too tight, too rough. As he sneered, "Fancy words don't mean squat out here." Baxter shoved her toward the open door of the SUV, his grip bruising her bicep. "Should have stayed quiet," he added, his tone dripping with contempt, oblivious to the title on. Her ID blind to the power behind her name. The cruiser's interior smelled of stale coffee and vinyl, the seat sticky against her legs as they peeled out of the lot, tires spitting gravel. Aisha sat rigid, her wrists throbbing, her mind a whirlwind of outrage and calculation. She knew, the law backward and forward, had taught it to hundreds, had wielded it from the bench. "You've got no grounds for this," she said, her voice low, cutting through the crackle of their radio. "No weapon, no threat, no crime. You're violating." "My rights?" Voss twisted in the passenger seat, his smirk back sharper now. "Keep talking, Princess. Makes it easier to write up the report." Baxter chuckled, a low rumble, his eyes fixed on the road. "Resisting arrest, causing a scene. That's what we saw." Aisha's jaw tightened, her nails digging into her palms. They didn't know who she was, not really, and that ignorance fueled their arrogance. The precinct loomed ahead, a squat brick building ringed with chain link, and they hauled her inside, past a desk sergeant who barely glanced up. She demanded her phone call, her attorney, but Voss shoved her into a holding cell, the door clanging shut with a hollow boom. "You'll get out when we say," he said, turning away as Baxter scribbled something on a clipboard, his handwriting jagged and rushed. Hours bled by, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of wasps, the concrete bench chilling, her bones. No lawyer came, no charges were read, just silence and the faint echo of boots in the hall. Finally, past midnight, a bored officer unlocked the cell, tossing her wallet onto the floor. "You're free to go," he grunted. No explanation, no apology, as if the last 8 hours were a clerical error. Aisha stepped into the muggy night, her blazer wrinkled, her wrists ringed with red welts, her binder lost to the park's dust. The city hummed around her, oblivious, streetlights casting pools of gold on the pavement. She flagged a cab, her mind already mapping the lawsuit she'd file: unlawful arrest, racial profiling, excessive force. This wasn't just personal, it was systemic, a cancer she'd spent her career fighting. The driver dropped her at her craftsman-style home in the Titusville neighborhood, its porch light flickering like a weary sentinel. She climbed the steps, her key trembling slightly in the lock, and froze. The front door hung ajar, splintered wood jutting from the frame. Inside, chaos reigned. Her office, a sanctuary of bookshelves and framed degrees, lay in ruins. Files smoldered in a heap, their edges curling black, the air thick with the sting of smoke. Her desk, a sturdy oak piece she'd inherited from her father, bore a fresh scar. A jagged racial slur, carved deep with a blade, the letters raw and bleeding sawdust. Aisha's breath hitched, her knees buckling for a split second, before steel flooded her spine. She grabbed her phone, dialing Lena Brooks, her best friend and a bulldog of a reporter at the Birmingham Times. "They hit my house," she said, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. "Who?" Lena asked, already grabbing her keys. "The cops who arrested me. This is war." She hung up, staring at the wreckage, her resolve hardening into something unbreakable. They'd underestimated her, thought they could scare her silent. They didn't know the storm they'd unleashed, the fury of a woman who'd spent decades turning pain into power. This wasn't the end, it was the spark, and Birmingham would burn before she let it die. Aisha Carter woke the next morning with a fire in her chest, the sting of yesterday's cuffs still pulsing in her wrists as she sat at her kitchen table, a chipped mug of black coffee steaming in her hands. The ruins of her office loomed through the doorway, a battlefield of charred paper and splintered wood, that hateful slur glaring from her desk like a wound that wouldn't clot. She'd barely slept, her mind spinning with legal strategies, her phone buzzing with texts from Lena Brooks, who'd crashed on her couch after midnight, already drafting an exposé. By 8, Aisha was on the phone with her attorney, Marla Hines, a sharp-tongued civil rights lawyer who toppled police departments before breakfast. Unlawful arrest, racial profiling, property damage, Aisha listed, her voice steady as iron, and I've got witnesses in the park. File it. Today. Marla didn't hesitate. Federal Court, Birmingham District, we'll bury them. By noon, the paperwork was in motion. A 30-page complaint naming officers Trent Baxter and Kyle Voss, the Birmingham PD, and the city itself. Aisha felt the first flicker of control, a tether pulling her back from the edge. She stepped outside, the muggy air clinging to her skin, and spotted a teenager across the street. The same skateboard kid from the park, now hovering with his phone. I got it all, he said, voice cracking with nervous pride as he held up the screen. The video shook but captured everything. Baxter slamming her against the cruiser, Voss twisting her arm, their sneers loud over her calm protests. Posted. It last night. It's blowing up. Aisha's eyes widened. 200,000 views already, comments flooding with outrage, hashtags like Justice for Aisha trending across Alabama. She nodded, a tight smile breaking through. Keep it rolling, kid. By afternoon, the video had legs, racing past 1 million views, shared by activists and news outlets alike. Protests erupted downtown, a sea of signs outside City Hall, voices chanting her name under a blistering sun. Aisha watched from Lena's cramped office at the Birmingham Times, the TV blaring shaky footage of marchers clogging 4th Avenue. This is your spark, Lena said, her braids swinging as she typed furiously, chasing leads on Baxter and Voss. Aisha's phone pinged with a text from Marla. City's sweating. They'll settle fast. For a moment she let herself believe it, the tide turning, the system bending under the weight of her truth. She walked to Miles College that evening, her heels clicking on the sidewalk, ready to teach her night class, her spirit buoyed by the roar of support. But the campus felt off, the air thick with whispers, as students parted around her, their eyes darting away. She reached her office and found a memo taped to the door, the university seal stark against the white paper. Due to recent public unrest and safety concerns, Professor Aisha Carter is suspended with pay pending review. Her stomach dropped, the words blurring as she read them twice, 3 times. Suspended? After 20 years of building that program, mentoring kids who'd never seen a black judge before. She stormed to the dean's office, her binder from the park tucked under her arm, the one she'd retrieved that morning, its pages still smeared with dirt. Dean Harold Grayson, a wiry man with a pinched face, sat behind his desk, avoiding her. It's temporary, Aisha, he stammered. The board's worried about optics. She leaned forward, her voice a low blade. Optics? Or pressure from someone with a badge? His silence was answer enough. She pressed record on her phone, sliding it across the desk. Say it, Harold. Who leaned on you? He flinched, his lips parting, then clamping shut. Trent Baxter's uncle, Councilman Grayson, my cousin. He called this morning. Aisha's blood ran cold. The councilman, a balding bulldog of a man who'd pushed tough on crime for decades, was family to her tormentor. She left the office, the recording burning a hole in her pocket, her suspension a fresh wound atop yesterday's scars. She didn't waste time. That night, she stood on her porch, the air heavy with the scent of magnolias, and faced a cluster of reporters Lena had rallied. Floodlights bathed her in a harsh glow, microphones thrust forward like spears. I'm not just a victim, she said, her voice ringing clear. I'm evidence of a system that protects its own. Councilman Grayson used his power to silence. It's me through my job. Here's the proof. She played the recording, Harold's shaky admission crackling through the night, the crowd gasping as the words sank in. Phones lit up, the story exploding anew, her suspension now a rallying cry. She went inside, her heart pounding with a fragile triumph, thinking she'd struck a blow they couldn't dodge. What would it take to break their grip? She locked the door, poured a glass of water, and paced her living room, the shadows of her ruined office stretching across the hardwood. She didn't hear the soft tick of a timer, didn't see the flicker of a fuse sparking in her driveway. At 11:32, the world erupted. A deafening roar shook the house, windows shattering inward, glass slicing through the air like 1,000 tiny knives. Aisha dove to the floor, her arms shielding her face as the blast's heat singed her skin, the stench of gasoline flooding her lungs. She crawled to the front window, peering through jagged shards, and saw her car engulfed in flames, a twisted skeleton of metal spitting embers into the night sky. The fire roared, licking the oak tree beside her porch, its branches curling black. Neighbors spilled onto the street, shouts mingling with the wail of sirens, but Aisha stayed rooted, her breath shallow, her eyes locked on the inferno. Something fluttered down from the smoke, a scorched scrap of paper landing at her feet. She picked it up, her fingers trembling as she read the scrawled message, "Drop it, or you're ash." Her knees buckled, but she caught herself against the wall, the paper crumpling in her fist. This wasn't random, wasn't a prank gone wrong. It was them, Baxter and Voss, or someone they'd sent, striking back with a fury she hadn't foreseen. She grabbed her phone, dialing Lena as the fire trucks screeched into view, their lights painting the night red and blue. "They blew up my car," she said, her voice a raw edge, "right after the press conference." Lena cursed, her chair scraping as she stood. "I'm coming over. This is bigger than we thought." Aisha hung up, stepping onto the porch as firefighters battled the blaze, water hissing against the wreckage. A cop approached, not Baxter or Voss, but a rookie with nervous eyes, asking routine questions she barely heard. "Probably a gas leak," he muttered, scribbling notes. She stared at him, the lie so blatant it almost made her laugh. Lena arrived 20 minutes later, her sedan screeching to a halt, her face a mask of fury as she shoved past the rookie. "This isn't a leak," she said, kneeling by the curb, pointing to a blackened canister half buried in the grass. "That's an incendiary device. I've seen them before." She pulled out her phone, snapping photos, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I've got a source, an ex-arsonist who flipped. Says he's done jobs for cops. I'll bet my last dollar this ties to Baxter." Aisha nodded, her jaw tight, the night air cooling the sweat on her brow. She'd fight, she'd sue, she'd win, no matter how deep their claws sank. But as Lena drove her to a hotel, the flames still dancing in her mind, she couldn't shake the dread. What kind of monsters would torch her life over a lawsuit? This isn't just about justice anymore. It's survival. Drop a comment with number 1 if you think Aisha's right to keep fighting, or number 2 if you'd back down against odds this brutal. Hit like if you're rooting for her to crush these cowards, and subscribe for the next chapter. Because trust me, the fire's just the beginning. What do you think happens when a judge turns the tables on a system that's already out for blood? Stick around to find out how far they'll go to bury her. Aisha Carter stood in the cramped hotel room Lena had booked, the beige curtains drawn tight against the dawn, her reflection a ghost in the smudged mirror above the dresser. Her wrists still ached from the cuffs, her blazer carried the faint tang of smoke from last night's explosion, but her resolve burned hotter than the wreckage of her car. She'd spent the early hours on the phone with Marla Hines, her attorney's voice crackling through the static as they refined the lawsuit. By 9, Marla called back, triumphant. "Federal judge signed off," she said, her tone sharp with glee. "Baxter and Voss are suspended pending investigation. Court orders public in an hour." Aisha exhaled, a weight lifting off her chest, the first real win since the park bench turned into a battlefield. She showered, the hot water stinging the cuts on her hands from crawling through glass, and, dressed in a fresh grey suit Lena had grabbed from her closet, she'd face the world today, not as a victim but as a force. By 10, she was outside the Jefferson County Courthouse, a brutalist slab of concrete dwarfing the downtown skyline, its steps swarming with protesters who'd marched from City Hall. Their signs bobbed above the crowd, bold letters screaming, "End police lies" and "Aisha fights back," their chants rolling like thunder across the plaza. She climbed the steps, her heels steady despite the tremor in her legs, and faced a knot of reporters, their cameras glinting like hungry eyes. "This suspension is a start," she said, her voice cutting through the humid air, strong and unshaken. "But it's not justice. Officers Trent Baxter and Kyle Voss abused their power, targeted me for my skin and retaliated when I fought back. The city can't hide from this." The crowd roared, fists pumping, phones aloft, capturing every word as it streamed live to millions. She felt the swell of it, a tide lifting her higher, her name echoing off the courthouse walls. A white-haired woman in the front row clutched a rosary, tears streaking her face, mouthing, "Thank you." Aisha nodded, her chest tight with something, between pride and pressure, and turned to head inside, Marla waiting to debrief. She'd taken 3 steps when the crack split the air, a sound like a whip snapping bone. Pain seared her scalp, a white-hot line grazing her temple, and she stumbled, blood trickling warm down her cheek. Screams erupted, the crowd scattering. Like leaves in a storm, bodies diving behind benches and pillars. Aisha dropped to her knees, her hands pressing the wound, her vision blurring as chaos swallowed the plaza. Another shot rang out, pinging off the stone beside her, chips flying like shrapnel. She rolled behind a planter, her breath ragged, her suit smeared with dirt and crimson. Footsteps pounded, security guards shouting, but the shooter was gone, a phantom lost in the panic. Paramedics rushed in, their gloved hands steadying her as they bandaged her head, the gauze tight against her throbbing skull. "You're lucky," one muttered, half an inch lower, and... He didn't finish, but she knew. She'd almost died on those steps, her victory snuffed out in a heartbeat. Lena shoved through the crowd, her face pale, her notebook clutched like a shield. "Aisha, oh my God," she said, dropping to her side as the medics stepped back. "Who did this?" Aisha's jaw clenched, her voice a rasp. "Them, it's always them." The cops hadn't just torched her car, they'd aimed to bury her. She refused a stretcher, standing on shaky legs, blood staining her collar as she waved off the cameras. "I'm fine," she lied, her eyes scanning the rooftops, the windows, the shadows where death had lurked. Lena drove her to a safe house, a nondescript duplex on the edge of Ensley, its peeling paint and sagging porch a far cry from her Titusville home. Inside, the air smelled of mildew and old coffee, but it was quiet, a bunker against the storm. Lena brewed tea, her hands trembling as she handed Aisha a mug. "I'm digging," she said, her voice low, urgent. "That wasn't random, too clean, too fast." Aisha nodded, wincing as she touched the bandage, the pain a dull roar now. "Find the gun," she said. "Trace it. They're not done." Lena spent the next hours on her laptop, calls bouncing between sources, her fingers flying across the keys. By dusk, she had something, her eyes wide as she shoved a printout across the table. "Rifle's a match. Serial number ties to a batch. Sold at a gun show in Mobile last year. Buyer? Linked to the Sons of Liberty, a white supremacist outfit. Guess who's got a cousin in their ranks?" Aisha's stomach twisted. "Voss," she said, the name a curse on her lips. Lena nodded grimly. "Deputy Chief Darren Voss. Kyle's kin. Runs the precinct's special ops. Money flows from him to the group off the books." Aisha leaned back, the tea cold in her hands, her mind racing through the web. Darren Voss, a hulking man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, had climbed the ranks on a platform of order, his speeches dripping with coded hate. She'd seen him at city events, his handshake a vice, his eyes sliding past her like she didn't exist. Now he'd aimed a bullet at her head, his nephew's grudge turned into a family affair. The suspension hadn't stopped them. It had lit a fuse. She stood, pacing the creaky floorboards, her shadow stretching long against the wall. "We sue deeper," she said, her voice hardening, "hit the whole chain, from Baxter to Darren. They want me dead. They'll have to try harder." Lena scribbled notes, her pen scratching like a heartbeat, but her brow furrowed. "They will," she said, "and they've got resources we don't." Aisha stopped, her gaze locking on the printout, the Sons of Liberty logo, a crude eagle clutching a cross. She'd faced down racists before, in courtrooms and classrooms, but this was a war machine fueled by badges and blood ties. Her scalp throbbed, a reminder of how close she'd come, but she pushed it down, her fury rising to meet it. "Let them come," she said. I'll dismantle them piece by piece. Lena nodded, but her eyes flicked to the window, the dusk settling like a shroud over the street. Neither of them heard the soft click of a radio outside, a voice murmuring coordinates into the night. That evening, Aisha sat on the sagging couch, drafting a statement with Marla over the phone, her words sharp as she outlined the sniper attack, tying it to the precinct's retaliation. "We've got the rifle link," she said. "Leak it to the press. Force their hand." Marla agreed, her voice tight with adrenaline. "It's a powder keg, Aisha. You're sure?" She was. She hung up, the room silent except for the hum of Lena's laptop, the weight of the day pressing against her ribs. She'd won in court, suspended her tormentors, stood tall for the cameras, and yet here she was, bleeding, hiding, hunted. The victory tasted like ash, her defiance a beacon for their wrath. Lena looked up, her face drawn. "They're not just mad," she said. "They're scared. A judge who fights back? That's a threat they can't ignore." Aisha nodded, her fingers tracing the bandage, the blood dry now, a crust against her skin. She'd thought the suspension would slow them, give her room to breathe, but it had only sharpened their claws. What had she unleashed by stepping into their crosshairs? As she drifted into an uneasy sleep, the safe house walls closing in, she didn't know the precinct was already moving. Their next play darker than she could imagine. Darren Voss sat in his office miles away, his desk littered with maps and burner phones, his voice a growl as he barked orders. "She's not done," he said, "so neither are we. Frame her, break her, end her." His nephew Kyle smirked, cracking his knuckles, while Trent Baxter stared out the window, his silence heavier than words. They'd aimed to silence her today, but they'd missed. Tomorrow, they'd hit harder, and Aisha's fragile win would crumble under the weight of their hate. Aisha Carter woke to the faint hum of a space heater in the Ensley safe house, the bandage on her temple itching as sunlight slipped through the cracked blinds. Her scalp throbbed from yesterday's sniper graze, but her mind was razor-sharp, replaying Lena's bombshell about Deputy Chief Darren Voss and his white supremacist ties. She'd barely sipped her tea when Marla Hines called, her voice buzzing with urgency. "Got a break," Marla said. "A witness from the courthouse steps saw the shooter flee. Caught it on a dash cam. Cops can't pin this on you now." Aisha's chest loosened, a rare breath of relief washing over her as she stood, stretching her stiff limbs. The footage hit the news by noon, grainy but damning. A hooded figure sprinting from a rooftop, no trace of Aisha's involvement. Protesters flooded Birmingham's streets again, their chants louder, angrier, banners waving outside the precinct like battle flags. She watched from the safe house TV, her name trending nationwide, hashtags like "Aisha lives" drowning out the city's spin. Lena grinned, slapping her laptop shut. "You're untouchable now," she said. "They missed their shot, literally." Aisha nodded, her lips curving slightly, the tide shifting back in her favor. She stepped outside, the air crisp with late summer haze, and met Marla at a downtown cafe, their table tucked beneath a striped awning. "We push harder," Aisha said, her voice low, resolute. "Sue the whole Voss clan." Marla scribbled notes, her pen flying, as Aisha felt the ground, steady beneath her for the first time in days. She'd survived their bullet. Now she'd bury them in court. That illusion shattered at dusk. Aisha returned to the safe house, her key turning in the lock, when the roar of engines shook the street. 4 black vans screeched to a halt, doors bursting open as a SWAT team in tactical gear stormed the yard, rifles glinting under the sodium lights. She froze, her heart slamming against her ribs as a bullhorn blared. "Aisha Carter, come out with your hands up." Before she could react, the front door splintered under a battering ram, wood flying like confetti. She raised her arms, shouting, "I'm unarmed," but a masked officer tackled her, his knee grinding into her spine as cuffs snapped tight around her wrists. The room spun, shouts overlapping as they dragged her outside, her knees scraping the concrete. Lena screamed from the curb, held back by a wall of shields, her phone live-streaming as news choppers buzzed overhead. "What's the charge?" Aisha demanded, her voice raw. But the lead officer, a hulking figure with a buzz cut, smirked through his visor. Possession, intent to distribute, illegal firearm. Found it all inside. She twisted, glimpsing bags of white powder and a pistol, tossed onto her couch, props planted in plain sight. The street lit up with camera flashes, the raid broadcast live to millions. Her name dragged through the mud again. They shoved her into a van, the door slamming shut, her world shrinking to the hum of tires and the sting of betrayal. This wasn't justice. It was a lynching with paperwork. County jail smelled of bleach and despair, the holding cell a grey box with a flickering bulb overhead. Aisha sat on the metal bench, her suit wrinkled, her wrists chafed red, her mind racing through the frame-up. She'd seen it before, taught it in class, drugs and guns, the go-to smear for black targets. She pounded the bars, demanding a lawyer, but the guard, a wiry man with a patchy beard, sneered, "Shut it, princess," his voice dripping with venom. Inmates in nearby cells jeered, their taunts laced with slurs, egged on by guards who lingered. Too long, their laughter echoing off the cinder-block walls. "Judge thinks she's too good for us," one shouted, banging a tin cup against the bars, the clang piercing her skull. She clenched her fists, her nails biting into her palms, and whispered statutes to herself, a lifeline against the chaos. Hours stretched into a day, then two, her bail hearing delayed by a judge she recognized. Milton Crane, a silver-haired relic who'd golfed with Councilman Grayson for decades. He denied her release, his gavel falling like a guillotine, his ruling citing flight risk and public safety. Aisha stared at him, his watery eyes avoiding hers, the fix so blatant it burned. She was trapped, the system tightening. Its noose, but she wouldn't break. She cornered a young guard during a shift change, a lanky kid with nervous hands, and slipped him a folded note. "Get this to Lena Brooks," she hissed, "Birmingham Times. Tell her it's planted." He hesitated, then nodded, pocketing it as he shuffled away. Lena moved fast. By day 3, the note hit her desk, and she aired the story that night, a blistering segment on a local news stream. "Aisha Carter's a target," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "Cops planted evidence, and I've got proof." She'd tracked down a neighbor who'd seen the SWAT team arrive with bags, not find them. His shaky testimony paired with jail logs showing guards coaching inmates to harass Aisha. The clip went viral, protests swelling outside. The jail, tires burning in the streets as the city teetered on edge. A federal magistrate stepped in, ordering her release on a technicality. The search warrant lacked specificity. Aisha walked out at dawn, her suit torn, her bandage peeling, but her head high as supporters cheered, their voices a wall against the precinct's lies. She hugged Lena, her friend's arms trembling, and whispered, "We're close." The wind felt real, a crack in their armor, until she reached her sister Nia's house in East Lake, a modest brick ranch where she'd sent her family to hide. The front yard was a war zone, the windows shattered, the porch blackened with soot. Nia stumbled out, her face streaked with ash, clutching her son Jamal, his eyes wide with terror. "They burned it," she sobbed. "Last night after you got out. We barely made it." Aisha's knees buckled, her breath catching as she saw the swastika sprayed across the charred front door, its jagged lines a scream in red paint. Jamal clung to her leg, his voice small. "They said it's your fault, Auntie." She pulled him close, her heart splitting, the victory dissolving into ash. She stepped into the ruins, glass crunching under her shoes, the air thick with the reek of gasoline and melted plastic. The living room was a skeleton, the couch a heap of charred springs, family photos curled black on the floor. Nia's husband, Marcus, emerged from the back, his arm bandaged from dragging Jamal out a window. "Fire started at 3, he said, his voice hollow. "Neighbors saw a truck peel." "Out." "No plates." Aisha's fists clenched, her nails drawing blood as she pieced it together. The cops hadn't stopped. They'd struck her family the second she walked free, their hate a hydra growing new heads. She called Lena from Nia's cracked phone, the line buzzing as her friend picked up. "They hit my sister's place," she said, her voice ablade. "Find the truck." Lena cursed, her chair scraping. "I'm on it. Stay safe." Aisha hung up, her eyes locked on the swastika, its curves mocking her every step forward. She'd Cleared her name, walked out of jail, thought she'd won, but they'd turned her freedom into a curse. Nia sobbed behind her, Marcus pacing, Jamal trembling, and Aisha felt the weight of it all, her fight bleeding into their lives. She wouldn't stop, couldn't, but the cost was climbing, each victory a trap, snapping shut. As she helped Nia salvage what little remained, the night closed in, Birmingham's skyline a jagged silhouette against the stars, hiding the next blow she couldn't yet see. What would you do if your family paid the price for your stand? Drop number 1 in the comments if you'd keep fighting like Aisha, or number 2 if you think she's pushing too far. Smash that like button if you're raging at these cops, and subscribe because the next twist will leave you stunned. Can Aisha outsmart a system that's already drawing blood from her loved ones? Find out what happens when the hunted strikes back harder than ever. Aisha Carter stood in the shadow of Birmingham's Kelly Ingram Park, the late August sun baking the asphalt, as she faced a swelling crowd, their voices a tidal wave crashing against the statues of civil rights heroes. She'd spent the morning with Nia and Jamal at a motel, their salvaged belongings stuffed into trash bags, the swastika's red glare still searing her mind. Her sister's sobs had faded into a brittle silence, Marcus's eyes hollow as he watched Jamal draw on a napkin, the boy's small hand trembling. Aisha had kissed them goodbye, promising safety she couldn't guarantee, and met Lena at the park's edge, where organizers had rigged a makeshift stage beneath a canopy of oaks. The arson story had broken wide open, Lena's article screaming across front pages, her neighbor's shaky video of the truck looping on every news feed. Aisha wore a borrowed black dress, her bandage swapped for a discreet adhesive strip, her voice steady as she gripped the microphone. "They burned my sister's home," she said, her words slicing through the humid air, "because I wouldn't bow. This isn't just my fight, it's ours. Birmingham's police think they can silence us with fire. We say no more." The crowd erupted, 1,000 strong fists raised, their chants of "no more lies" shaking the ground. She saw faces she knew, students from miles, church ladies in Sunday hats, kids hoisting signs scrawled with marker. For a moment, she felt invincible, their fury a shield against the precinct's claws. Lena stood beside her, snapping photos, her braids swinging as she whispered, "States listening. Governors forming a task force." Aisha nodded, her pulse quickening with hope. The rally stretched into the afternoon, speakers rotating, their stories echoing hers, a mechanic roughed up for loitering, a nurse cuffed for asking why. Aisha closed it out, her voice rising. "We demand answers, accountability now." The applause was a roar, a living thing, and she stepped off the stage, sweat beading on her brow, thinking she'd lit a spark they couldn't douse. She was wrong. At 3:47, as she shook hands with a pastor near the stage, a low rumble cut through the noise, a sound like a truck backfiring. Then the world split apart. A blast tore from the crowd's center, a fireball blooming, orange and black hurling bodies like rag dolls. Aisha hit the ground, her ears ringing, dirt clogging her throat as screams shredded the air. Smoke choked the park, thick with the reek of gunpowder and burning flesh, as she crawled toward the chaos, her hands clawing the grass. 5 lay dead, their limbs twisted at wrong angles, blood pooling beneath them. Dozens more writhed, clutching wounds, their cries a jagged symphony. She found a girl no older than Jamal, her leg shredded, and pressed her scarf against the gash, whispering, "Hold on," as tears cut tracks through the soot on her face. Sirens wailed, medics rushing in, but Aisha's eyes locked on the crater, where the stage had been, now a smoking ruin. This was no accident, it was slaughter. She stumbled to her feet, her dress torn, her hands sticky with blood, guilt clawing her chest. These people had come for her, died for her words. Lena grabbed her arm, her face streaked with ash, her voice hoarse. "We've got to move," she said, dragging Aisha through the fleeing crowd, past ambulances and shell-shocked faces. They reached Lena's sedan, parked a block away, and peeled out, the park shrinking in the rear view as Aisha's mind spun. "Who did this?" she rasped, her throat raw. Lena's jaw tightened, her hands white on the wheel. "I'll find out." Back at the safe house, the TV blared. pundits already twisting the narrative. Carter's radical rhetoric incited violence, one sneered, his tie a garish red slash against the screen. Aisha's stomach churned, her name a weapon turned. Against her, the dead pinned to her chest like metal she'd never wanted. Lena worked her phone, calling sources, her voice a low growl as she chased the bomb's origin. By midnight, she had it, slamming a notepad on the table. Homemade. Explosive fertilizer base. Triggered remotely. My guy at ATF says it matches a device used by a police informant last year. Guess who paid him? Aisha's eyes narrowed. Darren Voss? Lena nodded, her lips a thin line. Through a shell account. He's covering tracks, but it's him. Aisha stood pacing the creaky floor, the weight of 5 lives pressing her down. She'd rallied them, won their trust, and they'd paid in blood. She wouldn't let it stand. She called Marla at dawn, her voice a shard of glass. File an emergency injunction. Link the bomb to Voss. We've got the informant's paper trail. Marla cursed, her pen audible through the line. This is war, Aisha. They'll hit back. Harder. She knew, but she pressed on, the rally's ashes fueling her. By noon, the news shifted. Lena's latest scoop airing the informant's ties. The crowd's anger turning outward again. Aisha thought she'd regained ground, until her phone buzzed with a bank alert. She logged in, her breath catching as the screen showed 0 balances across her accounts, savings and checking drained to nothing. A fraud probe notice followed, flagged by Birmingham First National, claiming suspicious transactions. She called the bank, her voice shaking with fury, but the manager stammered, "It's out of my hands, ma'am, orders from above." Lena dug in, her laptop glowing in the dim room, and found the link by dusk. Darren Voss's cousin, Sheila. Voss runs compliance there, she said, her eyes blazing. They froze you out, timed it with the bomb fallout. Aisha's fists clenched, her nails biting her palms, the financial gut punch landing harder than she'd expected. No money. No resources, her family still in a motel with nothing. She'd rallied a city, exposed a killer, but they'd stripped her bare, their reach deeper than she'd feared. She sank onto the couch, her head pounding, the day's weight crushing her. Lena brewed coffee, the pot gurgling as night fell, the safe house silent except for the hum of crickets outside. Aisha replayed the rally, the blast, the blood, her mind a loop of what-ifs. She'd almost convinced herself to rest, when a crash shattered the quiet, glass exploding inward as a Molotov cocktail sailed through the window, flames bursting across the floor. She dove behind the couch, Lena scrambling for a blanket, the fire licking the walls with greedy tongues, the air thick with gasoline fumes. Aisha grabbed a pillow, beating back the blaze as Lena smothered it, their coughs hacking through the smoke. The flames died, leaving scorch marks and a shattered bottle, its rag still smouldering. Aisha stumbled to the broken window, her bare feet crunching glass, and saw a figure sprint into the shadows, a truck's taillights vanishing down the street. Her lungs burned, her hands trembling, but she stood tall, the attack a slap after the day's punches. Lena kicked the bottle aside, her voice a snarl. "They're not stopping." Aisha nodded, her dress singed, her skin prickled with heat. She'd rallied them, survived their bomb, thought she'd turned the tide, but they'd hit her again, harder, faster. Their hate a wildfire she couldn't outrun. She stepped outside, the night air cool against her sweat, and surveyed the damage. The safe house's front a blackened scar. Lena followed, her phone already out, snapping evidence. "We've got to relocate," she said. "They know where we are." Aisha agreed, her mind racing as she packed what little she had, the motel's address flashing in her thoughts. Nia? Jamal Marcus exposed because of her. She'd led a rally, shaken the state, forced their hand, but the cost was spiraling, each win a trigger for their wrath. As they drove to a new hideout, a dingy apartment in Pratt City, the city lights blurred past, Birmingham a maze of enemies and allies. She clutched her phone, the bank alert still glowing, her accounts a ghost town. They'd taken her money, her safety, her peace, but not her fight. She whispered to herself a vow in the dark, "You'll pay for every drop." The rally's echoes faded, replaced by the hum of tires and the promise of war, their next move lurking just beyond the horizon, deadlier than she could guess. Aisha Carter stood in the dim Pratt City apartment, the air heavy with the musk of damp carpet and stale cigarettes. her eyes fixed on the scorched blanket from last night's Molotov attack. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, texts from Marla piling up about the bank fraud injunction, but her mind was on Nia, Jamal and Marcus, still holed up in that East Lake motel, exposed like targets on a range. She'd rallied Birmingham, survived a bomb, but the precinct's claws kept digging. Her family caught in the crossfire. She grabbed her keys, the metal cold against her palm, and called Nia from the cracked kitchen counter. "Pack up," she said, her voice tight. "I'm moving you today." Nia's breath hitched, her words shaky. "To where, Aisha? They burned our house." Aisha swallowed, her throat dry. "A friend's cabin 30 miles north, off the grid." Lena looked up from her laptop, her brow creasing but nodded, already mapping the route. By noon, Aisha pulled into the motel lot, her borrowed sedan rattling over potholes, the sun a harsh glare off the peeling stucco. Nia waited outside, her arms crossed, Jamal clinging to her leg, his backpack slung low. Marcus loaded their bags, his bandaged arm stiff from the arson rescue, his jaw set like stone. "This ends when?" he asked, slamming the trunk. Aisha met his gaze, steady but hollow. "When they're done or we are." They piled in, the drive north a tense blur of pine trees and winding roads, the cabin a weathered box tucked in a hollow near Lake Purdy, its windows dark, its isolation a fragile shield. She settled them in, the wood-paneled walls creaking as Jamal explored, his small voice echoing with questions about fishing. Nia unpacked, her hands trembling as she folded Jamal's shirts, her eyes darting to the windows. "They'll find us," she whispered. "They always do." Aisha squeezed, her shoulder, her touch firm. "Not this time. I've got Lena watching, Marla pushing. We're hitting back." She left them with a burner phone, instructions to stay low, and drove back to Pratt City, her chest tight with the promise she'd made. She'd keep them safe, no matter the cost. That resolve cracked the next day when Nia called, her voice a panicked sob. "Jamal's school expelled him," she said. "Called this morning, said they found a knife in his locker, but he's been here, Aisha. He hasn't been to school since the fire." Aisha's stomach lurched, her grip on the phone whitening. Her knuckles. She sped to the cabin, the gravel crunching under her tires as she pulled up, Nia pacing the porch, Jamal kicking dirt nearby. "They planted it," Aisha said, her voice a low growl. "Same game they played with me." She called the principal, a nasal woman named Clara Tate, who stammered through excuses about zero tolerance and anonymous tips. Aisha recorded it, her tone cutting. "Who tipped you? Name them." Clara hung up, the line dead, but Aisha had enough. She leaked the call to Lena, who aired it on a local podcast by dusk, the story ripping through Birmingham. A 6-year-old framed to punish his aunt. Protests flared again, parents picketing the school, and by morning the board caved, reinstating Jamal with a public apology. Aisha stood in the cabin kitchen, Nia hugging her, Jamal beaming, a rare win lighting the gloom. She thought they'd dodged the bullet. That night shattered the illusion. Aisha was back in Pratt City, drafting motions with Lena, when her burner buzzed, Marcus's voice a frantic rasp. "Get here now!" She heard Nia screaming in the background, glass breaking, a roar like a furnace igniting. Aisha floored it, the 30-mile drive a blur of headlights and honking horns, her heart hammering as she skidded onto the cabin's dirt road. Flames devoured the structure, a raging beast swallowing the roof, spitting embers into the starry sky. Nia stumbled from the woods, her nightgown singed, Jamal in her arms, his face buried in her shoulder. Marcus followed, coughing, his shirt torn, dragging a duffel. "Firebomb," he choked. Through the window we ran. Aisha sprinted to them, her shoes sinking in mud, her arms wrapping around Jamal as he sobbed, "It's hot, Auntie, it's hot." She pulled them back, the heat searing her face, the cabin's frame collapsing in a shower of sparks. Firefighters arrived late, their hoses useless against the inferno, the night a chaos of red lights and shouting. Aisha spotted a note in the ashes, half burned but legible. "Your blood's next." Her knees buckled, her breath a jagged gasp. The win over Jamal's school erased by this new nightmare. They'd struck again, harder, her family's sanctuary reduced to cinders. She gathered Nia, Jamal and Marcus, piling them into the sedan as the fire crew doused the wreckage, their faces blank with routine. Lena met them at a gas station 10 miles away, her sedan idling, her eyes wide as she took in their soot-streaked clothes. "They're animals," she said, handing Aisha a water bottle, her voice shaking. "I've got something. Fire chief's on tape, bragging about a payout from Darren Voss to call the first arson an accident. This one's next." Aisha's jaw tightened, her fingers crushing the bottle, water spilling over her wrist. "Leak it," she said, "now." Lena nodded, her phone already out, texting her editor. They relocated to a new hideout, a friend's. Basement in Bessemer, its concrete walls cold and bare. The family huddling under blankets as Aisha paced, her mind a storm. She'd moved them, saved Jamal's school, thought she'd bought time, but the precinct's hate was a tidal wave, drowning every step forward. Nia rocked Jamal, her voice a whisper. "We can't keep running." Marcus stared at the floor, his bandage unraveling, his silence louder than words. Aisha knelt beside them, her hand on Jamal's head, his curls soft against her palm. "I'll end this," she said, her voice steel. "They don't get to win." But as she stood, the note's threat burned in her mind. "Your blood's next," a promise she couldn't unsee. Lena's leak hit the airwaves that night, the fire chief's voice crackling through a late broadcast. "Voss paid me $5,000 to keep it quiet," his laugh a sick echo. Birmingham erupted, protests spilling into the streets, tires screeching as anger boiled over. Aisha watched from the basement TV, the screen's glow casting shadows on the damp walls, her family's shallow breaths a rhythm behind her. She'd protected them, fought back, won a battle, but the war had escalated. The firebomb a dagger through her hope. Darren Voss wouldn't stop, his network tightening around her. Each move she made a trigger for their fury. She sat beside Jamal, his small body curled against her, and traced the scars on her wrists from the cuffs that started it all. They'd taken her home, her money, her sister's peace, and now this. A cabin turned to ash. She wouldn't break. Couldn't. But the cost was a mountain, each victory a step closer to a cliff. As the night deepened, the TV flickering with images of burning precinct banners, she wondered how much more her family could bleed before she brought the bastards down. Would you risk everything to shield your loved ones from this kind of hate? Drop number 1 in the comments if you'd move heaven and earth like Aisha, or number 2 if you think she's dragging them too deep into this fight. Hit like if you're furious at these monsters torching her world, and subscribe, because the next chapter is going to blow your mind. What happens when Aisha takes her stand to the nation, only to watch it crumble in ways she never saw coming? Stay tuned to see how far this war stretches. Aisha Carter sat in the Bessemer basement, the concrete walls pressing in like a tomb, her eyes fixed on the flickering TV as protests raged across Birmingham's streets. The fire chief's leaked confession looped on every channel, his gruff voice admitting Darren Voss's bribe, the words a Molotov of their own igniting the city. She'd moved Nia, Jamal and Marcus here after the cabin burned, their faces drawn with exhaustion, their few belongings stuffed into duffels on the ghee floor. Jamal slept against her side, his breath shallow while Nia stared blankly at a wall, her fingers twisting a frayed blanket. Marcus paced near the stairs, his bandage unraveling, his silence a storm brewing. Aisha's phone buzzed with a text from Lena, who'd stayed in Pratt City to chase leads. "National News wants you," it read. "CNN, MSNBC, live tomorrow, your stories everywhere." Aisha's chest tightened, a mix of dread and resolve. She'd rallied Birmingham, survived their firebombs, but this was bigger, a spotlight that could burn as much as it illuminated. She typed back, "Set it up," her fingers steady, despite the ache in her bones. By morning, she stood outside the basement, the air crisp with September's first chill, her borrowed coat tight against her frame as Lena pulled up, her sedan rattling with urgency. "You're live in 2 hours," Lena said, her braids bouncing, as she handed Aisha a mic clip. They're calling it a civil rights crisis. Aisha nodded, her jaw set, ready to turn the nation's eyes on Birmingham's rot. The broadcast truck parked near 16th Street Baptist Church, its steeple a quiet sentinel against the skyline, the crew bustling with cables and lights. Aisha faced the camera, her black dress stark against the brick backdrop, her voice steady as she spoke to millions. "They arrested me for being black," she said, her words cutting through the static, "torched my family's homes, bombed a rally that killed 5. This isn't just Birmingham, it's America. Darren Voss and his precinct think they're untouchable. I'm proof they're wrong." The feed cut to the rally's carnage, the fire chief's tape, the swastika on Naya's door, a montage of her war. Twitter exploded. Aisha Carter trending globally, politicians weighing in, the governor promising a task force with teeth. She finished, the crew clapping. Lena grinning as she whispered, "You've got them running." Aisha felt it, a surge of power, her story a battering ram against their walls. She returned to Bessemer, the basement a cocoon as national headlines. Piled up, "Judge fights back, Birmingham's shame." For a moment she believed she'd shifted the earth, her triumph a beacon piercing the dark. She sat with Jamal, helping him with a puzzle, his small laugh a balm, thinking she'd finally outpaced their hate. That hope died at midnight. Aisha woke to her phone blaring, Marla's voice frantic. "Turn on the TV, now." She stumbled to the set, Nia and Marcus joining her, the screen flashing a breaking news banner. "Judge Carter caught in bribery scandal." A video rolled, grainy but clear. Aisha in a cafe, handing an envelope to a man in a suit, her voice dubbed, "Keep this quiet. 10 grand. The anchor's tone dripped with scorn. New evidence suggests Carter staged her attacks for clout, bribing officials to back her narrative. Aisha's stomach plummeted, her breath catching as Nia gasped, "That's not you." It wasn't. She'd never met that man, never said those words, but the footage was seamless, her face unmistakable. Protests faltered, allies went silent, her phone flooding with hate mail. Fraud, liar, disgrace. She called Lena, her voice shaking. "It's fake, find who did it." Lena arrived an hour later, her laptop glowing as she tore through digital trails, her curses. "Sharp. Deepfake," she said, "top tier. Trace the upload to a server owned by Voss Tech, run by Kyle's nephew, Ethan Voss." Aisha's fists clenched, her nails biting her palms. Ethan, a wiry kid she'd seen at precinct fundraisers, smirking. Behind his uncle. They'd flipped her triumph into a noose, her credibility a smoking ruin. By dawn, the fallout hit. A courier banged on the basement door, delivering a court order. Judge Aisha Carter suspended from the bench, effective immediately, pending investigation into misconduct. She read it, the paper trembling in her hands, her robe stripped by a lie. Marla called, her tone grim. "They've got the Judicial Council spooked. We'll fight it, but you're off the bench." Aisha sank onto a folding chair, the concrete cold through her jeans, Jamal watching. Her with wide eyes. "Why do they hate you, Auntie?" he asked, his voice small. She pulled him close, her throat tight, no answer to give. Lena worked her contacts, proving the video's edits by noon, pixel artifacts glaring under scrutiny. She aired it on a livestream. Carter cleared, deepfake exposed, and support trickled back, hashtags shifting to Truth for Aisha. Aisha stood taller, her suspension a wound but not a death blow, her voice reaching the nation again. She thought she'd clawed her way out, the fake debunked, her fight reignited. Then her phone rang, a nurse's voice trembling through the line. "It's your sister, Nia. She's in ICU at UAB Hospital. Someone gassed her room." Aisha dropped. The phone. Her breath a ragged gasp, Marcus bolting upright, Jamal crying out, "Mommy!" She grabbed her keys. The basement a blur as they raced to the car. Lena trailing, her face ashen. The hospital loomed, a sterile fortress under a grey sky. The ICU a maze of beeps and antiseptic sting. Nia lay in a bed, tubes snaking from her, arms, her skin clammy, her eyes shut in a coma's grip. A doctor, a wiry man with tired eyes, explained, "Toxic gas slipped through the vent. She's stable, but we don't know when she'll wake." Aisha's knees buckled, Marcus catching. "Hurt. his sobs muffled against her shoulder. Jamal pressed his face to the glass, his small fists pounding. "Wake up, Mummy." A nurse handed Aisha a note found pinned to Nia's pillow, its ink smudged but clear. "Silence, or she stops breathing." Aisha's vision tunneled, her hands shaking as she crumpled it, the threat a knife in her gut. She'd gone national, exposed their lies, thought she'd won, but they'd struck her heart, her sister a pawn in their game. Lena snapped photos of the note, her voice a hiss. "They're watching us," timing it with the video fallout. Aisha nodded, her eyes locked on Nia's still form, the beep of the monitor a cruel metronome. The culprits had vanished, no cameras catching their entry, the hospital staff clueless. She stepped into the hall, her coat dragging, and called Marla, her voice a shard. "Add attempted murder to the suit. They've crossed every line." Marla agreed, her pen scratching, but warned, "They'll escalate again." Aisha knew, the cost a mountain now, her family's blood on her hands. She sat by Nia's bed, the chair hard against her spine, Marcus and Jamal curled on a cot nearby, their breaths uneven. The nation had cheered her story a rallying cry, but the precinct had turned it to poison, her sister's life the price. She traced the scars on her wrists, the cuffs that started it all, and felt the weight of every win, each one a trap snapping shut. They'd taken her bench, her voice her sister's breath, their hate a hydra she couldn't slay. As night fell, the hospital lights dimming, she whispered to Nia, "I'll fix this," her vow a thread in the dark. But the note's words, burned. Silence or she stops breathing. A promise they'd kill again, harder, faster. She'd stood tall, shaken the world, but they'd hit her where it hurt most, her triumph a hollow shell. The basement's safety was gone. Birmingham, a battlefield. And as she watched Nia's chest rise and fall, she braced for the next blow, knowing it loomed closer than she could see. Aisha Carter sat by Nia's hospital bed, the sterile hum of machines a cruel lullaby, as dawn crept through the blinds, painting faint stripes across her sister's still face. The note, "Silence or she stops breathing," lay crumpled in her pocket, its threat a weight she couldn't shake. Jamal slept on Marcus's lap in the corner, his small snores a fragile thread of normalcy, while Marcus stared at the floor, his bandaged arm limp. Aisha's phone buzzed, Marla's voice cutting through the fog. "Judicial Council's reversing your suspension," she said, her tone sharp with victory. "Public pressure's too much after the deepfake proof. You're back on the bench today." Aisha's breath caught, a flicker of light piercing the key. Gloom. She'd been stripped of her robe, her sister gassed into a coma, but this was a lifeline, a chance to strike back. She kissed Nia's forehead, whispering, "Hold on," and left Marcus with strict orders to guard the room. Lena picked her up, her sedan weaving through Birmingham's morning traffic, the city simmering with unrest, protest banners fluttering like war flags. "You're assigned a misconduct hearing," Lena said, handing her a docket. "Baxter and Voss separate case. Excessive force on a teen last year. Starts at 10. Aisha's jaw tightened, her fingers tracing the paper. Fate had handed her the gavel over her tormentors, a twist too perfect to be chance. She strode into the Jefferson County Courthouse at 9:50, her black robe billowing, the fabric heavy with purpose as she climbed the bench. The courtroom, a vault of oak and tension. The gallery buzzed, reporters cramming the back, students from miles lining the front, their eyes wide with awe. Trent Baxter and Kyle Voss entered, their uniforms crisp but their faces pale, Baxter's granite jaw twitching, Voss's twitchy fingers still. They froze mid-step, locking eyes with her, recognition slamming them like a fist. Aisha's voice rang out crisp and unyielding. "This hearing is in session," her gavel striking once, a clean echo silencing the room. The case wasn't hers. A 16-year-old named Darnell Hayes roughed up during a stop. But the pattern was theirs. False charges, brutality, lies. The prosecutor laid it out, his voice steady, detailing Darnell's broken arm, the mismatched reports, Voss's smirk caught on a bystander's phone. Aisha listened, her pen scratching notes, her pulse a drumbeat as she watched them squirm. Then came the footage, a USB drive Marla had slipped her that morning, leaked from an internal source. Body cam audio, Voss barking, "Teach him respect." As Baxter slammed Darnell to the pavement, the boy's cries piercing the static. The room gasped, a low wave of fury rippling through, and Aisha leaned forward, her gaze ablade. "Officers," she said, her tone ice, "explain this." Baxter stammered. He resisted, his voice thin, while Voss muttered, "Procedure," his eyes darting. She pressed, "Where's the threat? Show me." They floundered, their lies unraveling, and she delivered the ruling. Suspension upheld pending termination review. Evidence of misconduct is overwhelming. The gavel fell, the crowd erupting, applause thundering as Baxter and Voss slumped, their badges tarnished by her hand. She stepped off the bench, her robe swishing, the victory a fire in her veins. Students mobbed her, shouting "Justice!" as reporters swarmed, their mics a forest around her. She'd faced them down, turned their own game against them, her biggest win yet. Lena met her outside, her grin fierce. "You crushed them," she said. "They're done." Aisha nodded, her chest swelling, thinking she'd finally tipped the scales. She drove back to the hospital, the sun dipping low, her mind replaying their stunned faces. The gavel's echo her anthem. She'd check on Nia, then plan the next strike, her momentum unbreakable. That illusion shattered at 8:30. She parked in Pratt City, stepping into the apartment to grab files. When the door crashed open, a mob of 6 bursting in, their faces masked, their boots thudding like war drums. She spun, her heart lurching, but a fist caught her jaw, snapping her head back, pain exploding white-hot. She fell, her elbow cracking the floor, and they swarmed, kicks slamming her ribs, her arms, her screams swallowed by their grunts. "Stay down," one growled, his voice muffled, as another sprayed paint across the walls, jagged slurs in dripping red. "Black bitch! Know your place." Blood pooled in her mouth, her vision swimming, but she clawed at a leg, her nails digging until a boot crushed her hand, the crunch of bone a sickening snap. They trashed her files, papers fluttering like ash, and fled, leaving her crumpled, gasping, the room a war zone of hate. She came to, her body a map of bruises, her left hand throbbing, blood crusting her lips. The walls screamed their venom, the paint still wet, the air thick with its chemical bite. She crawled to her phone, dialing Lena, her voice a rasp. "They hit me, mob, here." Lena arrived in minutes, her sedan screeching to a halt, her gasp sharp as she knelt beside her. "Oh God, Aisha," she said, helping her sit, her hands trembling as she snapped photos of the wreckage. "Who?" Aisha coughed, pain spiking her ribs. "Baxter's crew. Had to be." Lena's eyes narrowed, her phone already texting Marla. "We'll sue for this too." Aisha nodded, wincing as she stood leaning on Lena, her gaze locking on the slurs, their curves a mirror of the swastika on Nia's door. She'd won in court, suspended them, thought she'd caged the beast, but they'd struck back, savage and swift. Lena drove her to a clinic, the doctor stitching her lip, wrapping her hand, his face grim as he muttered, "You're lucky it's not worse." She wasn't lucky. She was hunted. Back at the hospital, she sat by Nia, her sister's coma a silent scream, and checked her messages. Lena had found more. Her car torched outside, a fireball in the night, a note in the ashes. "Court won't save you." Aisha's breath hitched, her good hand clenching, the victory a hollow shell now, her triumph undone by their rage. She stood, pacing the room, her shadow jagged against the tiles, Marcus watching her with hollow eyes. "They won't stop," he said, his voice flat, Jamal stirring awake beside him. Aisha nodded, her jaw aching, her mind racing. She'd faced them in court, wielded her gavel like a sword, but they'd turned her home into a battlefield, her body a punching bag. The mob's leader, she'd bet, was Baxter's ex-partner, a hulking brute named Ray Tillman, retired but loyal, spotted at precinct rallies with that same sneer. She'd won the hearing, her biggest blow yet, but they'd answered with fists and flames, their hate a tidal wave she couldn't outrun. She sank into the chair, her stitched lips stinging, her hand a throbbing lump, and traced Nia's IV line with her eyes. They'd taken her bench once, her sister's breath, now her safety, each win a trigger for their wrath. She wouldn't break, couldn't, but the cost was a chasm. her family's peace a fading dream. As the night deepened, the hospitals, a distant drone, she braced for the next hit, knowing it loomed darker than she could fathom. Could you face a courtroom win only to bleed for it hours later? Drop number 1 in the comments if you'd wield that gavel like Aisha, or number 2 if you think she's fighting a war she can't win. Smash like if you're seething at this mob's cowardice, and subscribe because the next chapter's a gut punch you won't see coming. What happens when Aisha rallies a city again, only to watch it bleed in ways that break her soul? Stick around to find out how deep this fight cuts. Aisha Carter stood in the hospital corridor, her stitched lip throbbing, her bandaged hand a dull ache as she leaned against the wall, Nia's coma a silent weight behind the glass. The mob's attack last night lingered in her bones, the slurs. On her walls a fresh scar, her torched car a smouldering ghost. She'd suspended Baxter and Voss, her gavel a thunderclap, but they'd answered with fists and fire, their hate a beast she couldn't cage. Lena burst in, her sneakers squeaking. On the tile, her eyes wild with urgency. "I've got the mob on tape," she said, thrusting her phone forward. "Security cam across the street. One's Ray Tillman, Baxter's old partner. We've got them." Aisha's pulse quickened, her good hand snatching the device, the grainy footage showing Tillman's hulking frame, his mask slipping as he swung a bat. "Leak it," she said, her voice a shard. "Tie it to the precinct." Lena nodded, already texting, her fingers a blur. By noon, the video hit the airwaves, Birmingham's black community erupting, their fury a tidal wave crashing against the city's silence. Aisha met with organizers at a church basement in Ensley, its pews packed with faces she knew, barbers, teachers, grandmothers, all nodding as she spoke. "They attacked me, my family," she said, her voice steady despite the pain, "but we're stronger together. Town hall tomorrow night, we demand the audit." The room roared, fists pounding tables, their resolve a fortress around her. She spent the day planning, her ribs protesting every move, Lena coordinating with a federal judge who'd called, his voice gruff but firm. "I'm ordering a full precinct audit," he said. "Your evidence forced my hand." Aisha exhaled a crack of light in the dark, the nation's eyes on Birmingham now. The town hall loomed, a brick box on Fifth Avenue, its doors flung wide by dusk the next day, 600 packing the seats, spilling into the aisles. She took the podium, her black coat stark against the beige walls, her words ringing out. "They bombed us, burned us, beat us," she said, "but we're here. Darren Voss, Trent Baxter, Kyle Voss, they're not untouchable. We demand justice now." The crowd surged to their feet, clapping, stomping, their voices a wall of sound. Hope swelling in her chest. Lena stood by the exit, snapping photos, her grin fierce as a local councilman pledged support, his tie askew with sweat. Aisha stepped down, shaking hands, her bandaged hand awkward but firm, thinking she'd rallied a city, turned the tide. Then the shots came. A staccato burst, sharp and brutal, ripped through the hall, glass shattering as bullets tore from the windows, bodies dropping like stones. She dove behind the podium, her heart slamming, screams piercing the air as blood pooled on the hardwood, 10 dead in seconds, their eyes wide, frozen. Lena crawled to her, her arm bleeding, her voice a rasp. "Get out." Aisha grabbed her, dragging her through the chaos, chairs toppling, the air thick with gunpowder and panic. They stumbled outside, the night a chaos of sirens and flashing. Lights, medics rushing past as survivors wailed, their hands slick with crimson. Aisha's ears rang, her coat torn, her mind reeling as she counted the fallen. A pastor, a student, Lena's cousin Tasha among them, her braids splayed in a puddle of red. She sank to the curb, her breath jagged, guilt clawing her throat. She'd called them here, rallied them, and they'd bled for it. Lena clutched her arm, her wound shallow but dripping, her eyes blazing. "This wasn't random," she said. "Too precise." Aisha nodded, her jaw tight, the precinct's shadow looming larger than ever. By midnight, Lena had a lead, her phone buzzing with a tip from a ballistics guy. "Shooter's a pro," she said. "Rifle matches one owned by Darren Voss's brother, Carl, ex-military, paid through a dummy corp." Aisha's stomach twisted, the family's web tightening. Her rally a trigger for their deadliest strike yet. The news spun it fast. Carter's chaos claims lives, her sanity questioned, headlines painting her a reckless firebrand. She stood in the hospital lot, watching Nia's room from afar. Marcus and Jamal inside, her fight a noose around their necks. She'd rallied a community, won the audit, thought she'd struck gold, but they'd turned it to slaughter. 10 graves. Her burden now. She paced the lot, her shoes scuffing asphalt, her mind a storm as Lena bandaged her arm with a strip of shirt. "We've got to hit back," Lena said, her voice low, fierce. "Use Carl's name." Aisha agreed, her good hand clenching, but before they could plan, her burner rang, an unknown number flashing. She answered, her breath stilling as a distorted voice crackled through. "We've got your nephew," it said. "Resign, or he's gone." The line clicked to a live stream, Jamal's face filling the screen, his eyes wide with terror. A gag biting his mouth, his small body tied to a chair. A masked figure loomed, snapping his arm with a sickening crunch, his muffled scream piercing her soul. Aisha dropped the phone, her knees buckling, Lena catching her as she gasped, "No, no, no!" Marcus burst from the hospital, his face a mask of rage snatching the device, his roar shaking the night. "Where is he?" he bellowed, but the call was dead, the stream looping Jamal's cry, the captor's demand clear, her fight or his life. She'd rallied them, faced the nation, thought she'd built a wall, but they'd ripped her heart out, her nephew's pain a blade she couldn't dodge. Lena grabbed her laptop, hacking the stream's source, her fingers flying as Aisha stood frozen, Marcus pacing, his fists pounding the car hood. "Warehouse district," Lena said. "Signal's weak, but it's there." Aisha nodded, her voice a shard. "We get him back." They drove, the city a blur of neon and shadow, her ribs screaming, her hand useless, but her will iron. She'd organized a town hall, shaken the precinct, won a federal ear, but they'd answered with bullets and blood. Jamal's arm a price she'd never meant to pay. They reached the district, a sprawl of rusting steel and broken lights, the sedan idling as Lena scanned for the signal. Aisha's eyes locked on a squat building, its windows black, a faint flicker inside. She'd rallied a community, watched it rise, but it bled now, her nephew's scream echoing in her skull. They'd taken her stage, her family, her hope, each win a trap snapping shut. As she stepped out, the night cold against her bruises, she braced for the fight, knowing the precinct's next move loomed darker than the shadows around her. Aisha Carter stood in the warehouse district's shadows, the Birmingham night wrapping around her like a shroud, her breath shallow as Jamal's muffled scream looped in her mind, his broken arm a jagged wound in her soul. Lena crouched beside her laptop glowing faintly, pinpointing the signal to a rusted building 50 yards ahead, its windows dark, its steel frame groaning in the wind. Marcus paced behind, his fists clenched, his voice a low growl. "We go in now," he said, his eyes wild, but Aisha grabbed his arm, her bandaged hand trembling. "They'll kill him," she said, her voice a rasp. "We negotiate first." Her phone buzzed, the distorted voice crackling through again. "Resign, Carter, or he's dead by dawn." She swallowed, her throat raw, and typed a response, her fingers shaking. "I'll step down, let him go." The reply came fast, a cold laugh echoing. "Public statement, live now. We're watching." Aisha's knees buckled, her ribs aching from the mob's kicks, but she nodded at Lena, who pulled up a livestream app, her face grim. "You sure?" Lena asked, her voice tight. Aisha wasn't, but Jamal's cry left no choice. She faced the camera, the warehouse looming behind her, and spoke, her words cutting the silence. "I'm resigning from the bench, effective immediately. Release my nephew." The stream went live, thousands watching, her surrender a bitter, pill-swallowed roar. Minutes dragged, the wind whistling through the district until headlights flared, a van screeching from the warehouse. It stopped 20 feet away, the side door sliding open, Jamal tumbling out, his arm dangling, his sobs piercing the night. Marcus bolted, scooping him up, his tears mixing with the boys as Aisha ran to them, her good hand brushing Jamal's curls, his small body shaking against her. "I'm here," she whispered, her voice breaking, the relief a flood through her veins. The van peeled off, tires spitting gravel, its taillights vanishing into the dark. Lena checked Jamal, her fingers gentle on his arm, her voice steady. "It's broken, but he's alive." Aisha hugged him tighter, her ribs screaming, her eyes locked on Marcus, his fury a silent storm. She'd traded her robe, her power for his life, a win that felt like ash. They drove to the hospital, Jamal whimpering in the back, Nia's coma a shadow over them as doctors set his arm, his small cries fading under sedation. Aisha stood by his bed, her coat stained with dirt and blood, thinking she'd saved him. Stopped the bleeding. She was wrong. By morning, Lena burst in, her face ashen, a fax in her hand. "Grand jury indicted you," she said. "Extortion based on the resignation. They're saying you coerced the kidnappers for leverage." Aisha's stomach dropped, the paper trembling as she read it, the lie so blatant it burned. Darren. Voss's fingerprints were all over this, his family twisting her sacrifice into a noose. She was arrested at noon, cuffs snapping tight around her wrists again, the hospital a blur of flashing cameras as deputies hauled her out, Marcus shouting, "She saved him!" The precinct was a fortress, its grey walls closing in as they booked her, her mugshot a stark frame of bruises and defiance. County jail swallowed her again, the same bleach-stink cell, the same jeers from inmates, but this time sharper. There, slow as a chorus egged on by guards. "Judge thinks she's slick," one spat, his voice a gravelly taunt banging the bars. Aisha sat on the bench, her bandaged hand useless, her mind racing through the indictment, a rigged game she'd taught students to spot. She cornered a guard, a wiry woman with a lazy eye, and hissed, "Get me paper." She scrawled a statement, her good hand cramping, and slipped it to Lena through a visitation slot that afternoon. "They framed me again," it read. "Leak the kidnapping proof." Lena aired it by dusk, the live stream looped with Jamal's rescue, her resignation. The van's retreat, her voice over a blade. "This isn't extortion, it's survival." Protests flared, tires burning outside the jail, the city's rage a wall against the lie. A federal judge stepped in, tossing the case on a technicality. The grand jury lacked jurisdiction over coerced statements. Aisha walked free at midnight, her suit torn, her lip stitches itching, the crowd cheering as she stumbled into Lena's arms, her nephew safe, her name cleared again. She'd won, she thought, the trap sprung. That illusion shattered at dawn. Aisha stood outside the jail, the air cool against her bruises, Marcus and Jamal beside her, when a shadow moved, a glint of steel flashing in the dark. Pain seared her side, a shank sinking deep. The inmates, face a blur as he struck, his snarl low. "From Voss," he hissed, twisting the blade before guards tackled him, blood pooling hot against her ribs. She fell, her vision swimming, Lena screaming as Marcus pressed his shirt to the wound, his hands slick with red. "Stay with me," he begged, his voice cracking, Jamal sobbing nearby. Medics rushed in, their stretcher rattling as they lifted her, the jail's lights fading as sirens wailed. She woke in UAB hospital, tubes snaking her arm, her side a throbbing knot, the doctor's voice distant. "You're lucky," he said, "missed the liver by an inch." Lucky felt like a lie. Her family's blood a river now. Jamal's arm, Nia's coma, her own flesh torn. Lena sat by her, her eyes red, her voice a whisper. "Inmate was paid. Burner phone traced to Darren's cousin, Sheila." Aisha nodded, her breath shallow. The precinct's reach a hydra she couldn't slay. She'd traded her robe, walked free, thought she'd won, but they'd stabbed her in the open, their hate a blade she couldn't dodge. She left the hospital at noon, her side stitched, her steps slow, as Lena drove her to Bessemer, Marcus and Jamal in the back, their silence a heavy fog. She'd barely settled, her coat still bloody, when the ground shook, a boom rattling the windows. She stumbled outside, her ribs screaming, and saw Lena's sedan erupt, a fireball twisting metal into the sky, glass raining like shrapnel. She dove to the grass, her stitches tearing, blood seeping as Marcus shielded Jamal, their shouts lost in the blast's roar. The car burned, a skeleton of flame, the air thick with gasoline and ash. Aisha crawled forward, her good hand clawing dirt. Her eyes locked on the wreckage. Lena staggering from the driver's side, her hair singed, her arm blistered. "I'm okay," she gasped, collapsing beside her, the heat searing their faces. A note fluttered from the blaze, half-charred. "You can't run." Aisha's breath hitched, her body a map of pain, the ambush a slap after the stabbing, her counterattack a failure. She'd saved Jamal, exposed the frame-up, walked free, but they'd answered with steel and fire. Her every move a trigger for their wrath. She sat on the curb, her side bleeding through the bandage, Marcus cradling Jamal, Lena coughing beside. Her as sirens neared, their lights painting the dawn red. The precinct wouldn't stop. Darren Voss's family a machine of hate. Her nephew's rescue a spark they'd drown in blood. She'd traded her robe, faced their lies, thought she'd outsmarted them, but they'd carved her flesh, torched her ride, their power a wall she couldn't breach. Firefighters doused the blaze, the sedan a blackened husk. Neighbors whispering from porches as medics checked her stitches, their faces grim. She stood, her legs trembling, her good hand steadying Lena, her eyes tracing the note's charred edges. They'd taken her bench, her sister, her safety, now her blood, each win a trap snapping shut. As the sun rose, Birmingham's skyline a jagged scar against the sky, she braced for the next blow, her fight a thread in the chaos, their hate a storm she couldn't outrun. Aisha Carter sat on the curb outside the Bessemer hideout, her side stitched tight from the shank, blood seeping through her shirt as the smouldering wreck of Lena's sedan hissed under the firefighters' hoses. The car bomb's heat lingered. So on her skin, her bandaged hand throbbing, Jamal's small sobs echoing from Marcus's arms nearby. Lena slumped beside her, her blistered arm cradled, her eyes hollow as medics wrapped it, the note's charred warning, "You can't run!" A ghost in the dawn light. Aisha's phone buzzed, Marla's voice cutting through the chaos. "Public's losing it," she said, her tone sharp. "Protests hit every precinct after the stabbing and bomb. Judicial Council's reinstating you. Hearings back on tomorrow." Aisha's breath caught, her ribs aching as she stood, the world tilting slightly. She'd resigned to save Jamal, been framed and stabbed, thought she'd lost the bench forever. But the city's rage had dragged her back. "Baxter and Voss?" she asked, her voice a rasp. "Still your case," Marla said. "Same docket, excessive force. You're their judge again." Aisha's jaw tightened, her good hand clenching, fate handing her the gavel once more, a chance to finish what she'd started. She nodded at Lena, who forced a grim smile, and turned to Marcus. "Stay with Nia and Jamal," she said. "I end this tomorrow." His eyes burned, but he agreed, carrying Jamal inside, the boy's broken arm a silent scream. She spent the day in the hospital, Nia's coma unchanged, her sister's chest rising and falling under the sterile glow. Jamal, curled beside her, Marcus pacing the hall. Aisha reviewed the case file Marla sent, her good hand flipping pages, the leaked body cam audio of Baxter and Voss brutalizing Darnell Hayes a fire in her gut. She'd suspended them once, faced their mob, bled for it, but tomorrow she'd bury them. Lena worked from a corner, her laptop humming, piecing together the bomb's forensics, her voice low. TNT traces, military grade, linked to a stash Darren Voss's brother Carl accessed last year. Aisha nodded, her stitches pulling as she stood, the precinct's web a noose she'd snap. By dusk, she checked into a motel near the courthouse, its faded curtains a shield, her body a map of scars as she slept fitfully, the hearing a looming storm. Morning broke grey and heavy. Birmingham's streets clogged with protesters, their chants a drumbeat as she strode into the Jefferson County Courthouse, her robe a mantle of iron, her steps steady despite the pain. The courtroom buzzed, packed. Wall-to-wall reporters scribbling, students whispering, the air thick with anticipation. Baxter and Voss entered, their uniforms crisp, their faces carved with defiance, Baxter's eyes narrowing, Voss's fingers twitching. She took the bench, her gavel striking once, her voice clear. "We resume the misconduct hearing of officers Trent Baxter and Kyle Voss. Present your defense." The prosecutor replayed the footage, Darnell's cries echoing, Voss's sneer a dagger through the silence, Baxter's silence damning. Aisha leaned forward, her gaze a blade. "You've heard the evidence," she said. Explain your actions." Baxter muttered, "He resisted," his voice flat, while Voss snapped, "Safety first," his eyes darting. She pressed, "Where's the threat? Show me compliance failure." They floundered, their lies crumbling, and she delivered the verdict, her voice rising. "Officers Baxter and Voss are terminated, effective immediately for excessive force and falsified reports. I recommend criminal charges." The gavel fell, a crack splitting the air, the room erupting, cheers shaking the walls as the officers slumped, their badges dead. She'd nailed them, her biggest win yet, the city's fury her hammer. She stepped off the bench, her robe swishing, protesters chanting her name outside, their voices a tide lifting her. Lena met her in the hall, her arm bandaged, her grin fierce. "You did it," she said. "They're gone." Aisha nodded, her chest swelling, thinking she'd caged the beast at last. She drove to the hospital, her stitches itching, her mind replaying their fall, the victory a balm on her wounds. She'd check Nia, plan the next strike, her fight unbroken. That illusion shattered at 9. She parked at the Pratt City apartment, stepping inside to gather her files. When the door exploded inward, a militia of 10 storming through, their faces masked, rifles glinting in the dim light. Aisha spun, her heart lurching, but a barrel slammed her chest, knocking her back, her ribs screaming as she hit the wall. They swarmed, boots thudding, one barking, "On the floor!" She swung her good hand, catching a jaw, but a stock cracked her skull, stars bursting as she fell, blood trickling warm down her temple. They dragged her dog, Max, from the corner, a scruffy mutt she'd fed scraps, and shot him point blank, his yelp cut short, his body slumping in a pool of red. Aisha screamed, her voice raw, but a boot pinned her chest, her stitches tearing as they rigged explosives, wires snaking across the floor, the air sharp with cordite. "You're done," one growled, his mask muffling a familiar growl. "Ray." Tillman's bulk unmistakable. They fled, the timer ticking, and Aisha crawled, her side bleeding, glass cutting her palms as she smashed a window, tumbling onto the lawn, the blast rocking the night behind her, flames swallowing the apartment. Her files, her refuge. She stumbled to her feet, her vision swimming. The militia vanishing into the dark, their rifles a fading glint. She staggered to Lena's sedan, parked a block away, her breath ragged, blood soaking her coat as she dialed Lena, her voice a gasp. "Militia hit me bombs, Max is dead." Lena screeched up minutes later, her face pale, helping Aisha in, her hands shaking as she snapped photos of the inferno. "Tillman?" she asked, her voice tight. Aisha nodded, wincing as she pressed her side, the dog's death a fresh wound atop her scars. They drove to the hospital, the night a blur of sirens and smoke, her stitches reopened, her skull pounding. She sat by Nia, Jamal asleep beside Marcus, her victory a hollow echo now, the precinct's answer a war she couldn't outrun. At midnight the TV blared, Darren Voss's voice smooth on a live feed, his suit crisp as he faced cameras outside the precinct. "Judge Carter's unstable," he said. "Her rulings are reckless, her actions chaos. We're investigating. Her for bias." Aisha's stomach twisted, her good hand clenching, the chief's liar slap after the militia's strike, her allies vanishing as the broadcast spun her triumph into madness. Lena cursed, her phone buzzing with texts, her voice, "Oh, he's got a mole. Leaked your address to Tillman." Aisha's eyes widened, her breath shallow, the betrayal a knife in her gut. She'd faced them, ended their careers, thought she'd won, but they'd turned her home to ash, her dog to blood, her city against her. She stood, her legs trembling, her side a wet ache as she paced the room, Marcus watching, his silence heavy. "They've got everything," he said, his voice flat, Jamal stirring beside him. Aisha nodded, her jaw tight, her mind racing. She'd wielded her gavel, struck them down, but they'd answered with bombs and bullets, their power a wall she couldn't breach. The militia's attack, Voss's smear, a 1-2 punch that left her reeling, her fight a thread in the chaos. She sank into a chair, her stitches pulling, her skull a dull roar, and traced Naya's IV line. The beep a cruel rhythm. They'd taken her bench twice, her family's peace, her blood, now her home, each win a trap snapping shut. As the night deepened, the hospital's hum a distant drone. She braced for the endgame, the final hearing's echo drowned by their hate, their next move a shadow she couldn't escape. Aisha Carter woke in the hospital, her side a throbbing knot from the reopened stitches, her skull pounding from the malicious blow, the stench of smoke still clinging to her torn coat. Nia's coma stretched silent beside her. Jamal curled against Marcus on a cot, their breaths a fragile rhythm in the sterile room. The apartment's ashes haunted her, Max's death a fresh scar, Darren Voss's smug voice on last night's broadcast a taunt in her ears. She'd terminated Baxter and Voss, her gavel a thunderbolt, but they'd bombed her world, their mole's betrayal a knife in her spine. Her phone buzzed, Marla's voice sharp through the haze. "Hearing's final today," she said. "Public's demanding it after the militia hit. You're still judge." Aisha's chest tightened, her good hand clenching, the chance to end it afire in her gut. She stood, her legs trembling, and dressed in a spare suit Lena brought, its grey fabric stiff against her bruises. She kissed Jamal's forehead. His broken arm a silent vow, and drove to the Jefferson County Courthouse. The streets a chaos of protesters, their chants a wall of fury lifting her. The courtroom loomed, packed to the rafters, reporters poised, the air electric with rage and hope. Baxter and Voss sat at the defense table, their faces pale, their defiance cracked as she took the bench, her robe a shield, her voice steady. "We conclude the misconduct hearing," she said. Her gavel striking once, a clean echo cutting the buzz. She laid out the verdict, her words a blade through the silence. Officers Trent Baxter and Kyle Voss are fired, their actions a betrayal of trust, a pattern of brutality and lies. The precinct faces overhaul, independent oversight mandated. The room erupted, cheers shaking the walls, fists pumping as the officers slumped, their careers ash. She leaned forward, her gaze locking on them, their eyes avoiding hers, the weight of her ruling a noose they couldn't dodge. Then she dropped the bomb. "I've worn a wire since last night," she said, her voice rising. "Captured during the militia attack. Deputy Chief Darren Voss ordered it, his voice clear." She played the tape, a crackling snarl echoing, "Finish her, Tillman. No loose ends." The chief's growl unmistakable. Gasps ripped through the gallery, reporters scrambling as federal marshals burst in, cuffs snapping around Voss's wrists mid-broadcast, his suit crumpling as they dragged him from the precinct steps, live on every screen. Aisha's breath steadied, her stitches pulling, the empire collapsing under her hand. She'd ended them, her biggest win yet, the city's roar a tide washing her clean. But she wasn't done. She stood, her robe heavy, and spoke again, her voice a quiet thunder. "I resign. Effective now. This bench needs fresh blood, someone unscarred. I pass it to Keisha Monroe, my protege, a black lawyer who'll carry this fight." The room hushed, a stunned beat. Then applause swelled, softer, deeper as Keisha rose, her eyes wide, her nod firm. Aisha stepped down, her robe slipping off, the weight lifting as she handed it to Keisha, her good hand steady, despite the pain. The crowd parted, their whispers a mix of awe and loss, her name a chant fading behind her. She'd torn the precinct apart, exposed the rot, thought she'd won the war, but the cost was a mountain, Nia's coma, Jamal's arm, her own blood, her home ash. She drove to the hospital, the skyline a jagged scar, her chest hollow as she sat by Nia, Marcus and Jamal asleep. The victory a bitter taste. She'd ended them, yes, but the fight had gutted her, her family's peace a ghost. That night, she walked home to a friend's spare room in Titusville, the streets quiet. Her step slow, her side a dull ache. She unlocked the door, the air cool against her bruises, and froze. An envelope lay on the mat, no address, just her name in tight scrawl. She tore it open, her breath catching as a single line stared back. "We're not done." Her knees buckled, her good hand trembling. The words a punch after the triumph, a promise of war reborn. She sank to the floor, the paper crumpling, her eyes tracing the ink, the precinct's fall a spark, not an end. She'd resigned, passed the torch, thought. She'd stepped out, but they'd pulled her back, fiercer, darker. The fight a hydra she couldn't slay. She stood, her stitches pulling, and pinned the note to a corkboard, its edges curling beside a photo of Nia and Jamal, a vow in the dim light. She'd ended Baxter, Voss, Darren, torn their empire down, but the shadows lingered, their hate a thread she couldn't cut. Keisha would wield the gavel, the city would heal, but Aisha's war stretched on, the streets her battlefield now. She stepped outside, the night cool against her scars, Birmingham's lights a constellation of hope. And ruin. She'd fought from the bench, bled for it, won it, lost it, and now she'd fight from the ground, her family's blood, her fuel. The note's threat burned. "We're not done," a call she'd answer, her resolve a flame they couldn't douse. As she walked into the dark, her shadow long against the pavement, the war's next chapter loomed, a cliffhanger she'd face head-on, the hunted turned hunter once more. Aisha Carter's journey in racist cops arrest black woman, freeze when she walks into court as their judge, reveals raw truths about resilience, systemic injustice, and the cost of defiance. Her story teaches us that standing against oppression is a brutal, unyielding fight, not a clean victory. Aisha faced arrests, bombings, and family harm, yet her spirit never broke, showing that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the will to push through it. Her battles expose how racism isn't just personal slights, it's a machine embedded in power, striking hardest when challenged. Each win she clawed from the jaws of hate came with a price: her home, her blood, her sister's breath. This underscores a harsh lesson. Justice often demands sacrifice, and the system doesn't bend without breaking those who push it. Yet her choice to resign, passing the torch to Keisha, highlights hope's quiet strength. Change isn't one person's burden, but a relay of resolve. The final letter, "We're not done," warns that victories are fleeting, battles endless, urging us to stay vigilant. Aisha's tale isn't a fairy tale ending, it's a call to recognize our own power, to fight even when the odds tower high, because silence lets the beast grow. What will you take from her war? How far would you go to stand up? Drop a comment with your thoughts, hit like if her grit inspires you, and subscribe for more stories of unbreakable souls. Share this if you believe in justice worth bleeding for. Thank you for joining Aisha's fight, and may you find strength to face your own storms.